spent 20 years managing change in an up-to-Tacoma environment. It's how I know Alistair, because our wives used to work together. Legitimate leadership has been a bedrock of approaches learning it in an early career. So she's going to talk about some feedback about various interviews we did.
Yep.
And realise again, we're all in the same sports storm, we're all in different sized boats, but there's a very common theme.
Yeah.
Rachel.
Thank you. So yeah, the after lunch slot challenge accepted. As you've worked out.
Switch that up.
Oh, as you've worked out, I'm the goth in the Cowin bog-off. But yeah, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a little bit of background in terms of where legitimate leadership fits in and where it's coming from so that you understand my perspectives. Then I'm going to talk about some work that I did as part of a paper that I presented at Hazards this year. I know there are a couple of people at Hazards. I don't know whether you caught my talk. Apologies if you did, and it's a repeat. And then I'm going to try and, so it's only the edited highlights from that paper, and I'm going to then try and sort of segue that back into how that relates to what we've been talking about today. So I work doing some process safety work, HasOps, but I also work as an associate of legitimate leadership. So I'm really interested in this whole, where do leadership behaviours come into it and how do they impact safety outcomes? So just a little bit about legitimate leadership. So legitimate leadership came out of the South African gold mining industry in the 1980s, which you can imagine was a very turbulent time. The end of apartheid was kind of playing out in industry almost before it started happening in politics. And there was a huge amount of strikes, almost like violence in some places. And the mining authorities decided to do a piece of trust research, and they interviewed over 70,000 people to find out what it was that accounted for trust. And they did this research, and what this chart's trying to purvey is, you might think that the answers would all, given the background, that the responses, so it was kind of from plus 10, completely trust, to minus 10, wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. And what they found was a really big difference from mine to mine, and even from shaft to shaft. So obviously, like good scientists, what they wanted to do is go, what can we correlate this with? And what they found was absolutely no correlation at all with all the usual levers that we would think to pull, like pay, conditions, whether or not there were unions. And in fact, the only correlation that they found, and this came about when they asked the subsequent question, has trust changed and why so? And it was actually this idea of, is my leader interested in what concerns me? So when I raise something, do they put aside their agenda and attend to what is important to me? And trust primarily, we found, is granted or withheld on this basis. And we've repeated this research several times, and it always rings true. And you might say, well, why is it so important that there's trust in the leadership of an enterprise? You know, when trust is strong, people will go with you. You know, you can push through even the most difficult situations. When there is not trust, even the simplest changes become really difficult. It's like wading in treacle. You know, and from a safety perspective, imagine when trust is strong, people will raise issues with you, confident that you will try and sort them, and that you won't hold them inappropriately accountable for things that have gone wrong. And you can trust them that when nobody is watching, they'll be doing the right thing. So what the research found, and it's been consistently repeated, is that over time, with a particular leader, we determine whether they are here to serve themselves or whether they're here to serve us. And when you have that kind of leader, and if you've had that kind of leader, you'll be able to tell me their name. You know, you never forget that kind of leader when you've worked for one. And we'll do anything that they ask us simply because they've asked. You know, we would say that is real power. And what we do at Legitimate Leadership is try to work to transform organisations from ones where the culture is one of taking to one where the culture is one of giving. And we do that by the way leaders behave. What we've found time and time again is leaders change, people change, then you get different outcomes. So, what is it? If these legitimate leaders are inspiring us by giving, what is it that they are giving? We've asked all over the world, at every level of an organisation, who is the boss you would willingly work for, your ideal? And it doesn't matter if you're talking about the head of a tech company in Japan or a manual labourer shoveling rocks in South Africa. The answers are all startlingly similar, and they look something like that. I think we perhaps don't say this often enough, because it's almost like we don't allow ourselves to admit that this is actually what we want. It's a fundamental expectation of anyone in power. And I think when we find like we're kind of really disappointed in politicians, why is it? It's because they are failing to deliver on these things. And we boil these down into two key themes. The first one is a softer theme. So someone who knows me as a person, cares about me as a person, listens to me. And then a tougher theme, someone who will give me honest feedback, challenges me, is looking to bring out the best in me. And we call that growth. And we see growth as having three main strands: means, ability, and accountability. So, which leads me to the piece of work that I did over the summer and presented last week at Hazards. So last year was the first year we presented at Hazards, and we'd done a piece of work on safety leadership excellence. And I've got a visual on that at the end, and I have some glossy bits of paper if people want them at the end, and I can give you both papers if you're interested. But when I first presented at Hazards, I was, it's great. You hear about lots of good practice, lots of for instancing, but what people don't talk about is some of the stuff that I think, really positively you've all been talking about in this room, but the kind of dirty laundry. And it's kind of understandable. You're not going to get up at an international conference and air your dirty laundry. But I do think it's really important that we talk about this, because otherwise, I think we see everyone's best story. Meanwhile, we're reflecting on what we know is going on in our dress rehearsal. And you can feel like, God, is it just me? Am I the one getting all this? The truth is everyone's getting it wrong. We're just not talking about it. And I think it's really important we share that, because we need to be honest with ourselves about what this unvarnished picture looks like. What one of my interviewees said to me was, if we start believing the stories we tell other people that put us in the best light, we really have a problem. So I thought, well, I'm in quite a nice position. What I'm going to do is do some off-the-record conversations with people and say, there's absolutely no way I'm going to present anything that would identify you. Tell me a bit more about what's really going on underneath. And so the paper that I put together kind of presented those key themes, and what I've got here are some of the edited highlights of that, or lowlights potentially, as you might see it. So the people I spoke to came from a wide range of industries, people at the beginnings of the career, people more mature. There were staff people who gave you kind of a depth in the organisation, someone who'd been there for a long time, potentially seen things come and go, and then consultants who gave you a breadth because they could give you reflection of a range of clients. And what did I do? I interviewed them, and they were free-ranging conversations. The questions are in the paper, so like I say, you can have a copy of them. And because I do think that, I tried to ask questions that were kind of coming at things from a slightly different perspective than you might do. Like, okay, you sat there at home in the evening, the phone rings, and you can see it's work. Where has your mind gone? That's probably telling you what it is at the back of your mind that you're actually worried about. But they didn't have to answer all these questions. We just used them as a jumping off point and took the conversation where they wanted to take it. And that's really what I'm presenting. And my first point would be, I don't think we really perhaps these aren't the people in this room, but if you were a senior leader in an organisation and you were telling me that you wanted to get up in front of people and say safety is your number one priority, I would say perhaps have a think about that. Because basically the people I spoke to don't see that. Look, they understand that there's always a balance to be made between money and safety, but what came across very strongly to me was that money is in the driving seat. If there's a disconnect between what is said and what actually happens in practice in safety, it comes out really quickly. Yeah, and they don't see it. I heard examples of major cost-cutting decisions that have big safety implications, people resigning as a result of safety concerns that weren't getting addressed, budgets that weren't big enough, things that we would probably, the kind of people at hazards would see were the absolute fundamentals still going wrong. So, they don't see money as being being the priority. Senior leader competence came across as an enormous issue. It's uncomfortable, but I think a lot of process safety specialists feel unsupported. Consultants talk about clients who are ticking boxes rather than understanding about where a particular study or tool or service actually fits within properly managing your risk. And a LARP was mentioned as a particular theme where lots of senior people don't get it. If it's in the LARP zone, it's okay. No, it's in the LARP zone, so now you work to prove that it's a LARP starts. They don't get that. And I think what this is all leading to is a bit of a breakdown in trust. What you'd see is that up to a certain point in an organisation, people are willing to share. And then beyond that, there's this kind of point of inflection. Basically because if I tell the guy above me that there's a problem, he's not going to be able to help me because he doesn't understand it. And I'm sorry I'm saying him because mostly it is him. He's not going to understand it. And actually all he's going to do now is ring me every 3 days to ask me whether I've fixed the problem. So why would I tell him? I think we can all sort of identify with that experience. Not across the board, but there are leaders who want to help, but saying, tell me what you need isn't what they're looking for. People are looking for someone who can be a sounding board, can help me co-invent a solution, can help me work my way through this issue. There was a picture of a process safety team who are completely overstretched. Senior process safety people are doing the work, have all the burdens that go with managerial roles, and they're trying to train people up. What's leading to that? Just the sheer breadth of work on ageing assets, particularly if the budgets aren't big enough. Staff churn, exacerbated where there are hubs of industries where people can leave one organisation, just turn left instead of right at the roundabout in the morning, go to a different business. Or where you're in an international setting where there's advantages to people going and working in a different country abroad, maybe tax-free, do better. Oh, it seems to be automatically moving my slides on, apologies for that. And then a very clear theme of employees doing a certain amount of time in process safety, and then junior people, and then moving on, because basically better career prospects in different functions in the organisation. So I think there's sort of two strands in terms of where do we go from here. I think for both leadership and process technical leadership, I think there's work for both of us. So I think what we're looking for from senior business leaders is someone for whom safety is not a priority, but actually it's a value. And a value is something that it's not an agenda item you can choose to do or not do. It kind of sits within you, and it kind of informs every decision that you make. What's the safety angle on this? That's what we're looking for. And you don't demonstrate that by having lovely strap lines on the walls. You demonstrate it through your behaviour. And if business leaders are looking for opportunities to evidence their commitment to safety, they don't need to worry because they're all over the place all the time in loads of decisions. And the issue is how you engage with those decisions and live safety as a value. And how do we know what's important to someone? It's what they spend their time on. Your diary paints the picture. And I think there's a very clear picture here for senior leaders about the need to serve their people by getting sufficiently competent in safety to have the supportive coaching, enabling conversations with people. But I also think there's work to do for the safety professional. I think we need to, and I say we because I kind of see myself as being part of that group, is that we need to reimagine our role. I think if we're honest, quite often these roles are seen as being the territory of people who are more comfortable with the technical than the people. These sacks of meat are quite hard to handle, aren't they? They don't behave like engineering things. So, we have to get comfortable with that. But the quid pro quo with that is that, I think these roles need to be seen as key to the business. If businesses want ongoing excellent safety, they want to be employers of choice, they want people to stay in the business, these senior technical roles have to be seen as key. Should they actually be part of every senior career journey? I would suggest. But in order to do that, safety professionals have to recognise that they need to be excellent communicators. We need to be influencers who are trying to, sell a vision of better engineered, more intrinsically safe things. We need to be able to resolve conflict. Healthy conflict is going to come out of these conversations as we find our way through safety. We need to be mentors and influencers of leaders in the line who do, the real grunt work of safety. We need to be role models. So, we should expect more from organisations, but we also have to be, those kind of people, role models. So then, just in closing, what I really want to do is talk about some specific changes. So those are kind of like the philosophical differences I think we need to enact in ourselves, but some practical changes to leadership practice that we can all do. And there's like a page of them in the paper, but I've pulled out one or two because I think we can tie these back to the things we've been talking about today. So we need to spend time at, it feels a bit of a brave thing to do, to stand up in front of a set of safety professionals and say audit less. But I would say, we need to what we call watch the game, which is spend time meeting our employees where they are and understanding issues of means and ability rather than auditing. And when there are issues of means and ability, it's our job to fix them. Rather than an audit where you leave the sheet with the auditee and go, there you go, that's for your resolution. So, which takes us to this issue of what do we mean by means and ability in safety? Means are the things that allow people to do their job. Time, an absolutely key means issue. I think we would all recognise that. People need the right things, budget, tools. People need to be in the right environment. I think this ties back to the idea of, we're probably a lot of people here are aware of things like performance influencing factors. Controls are obviously required in a part of every safety management system, but they need to be in the right place. As low down the organisation as possible with the people who have the information. If you write, and control should not be a substitute for accountability because we're not willing to have the accountability conversations. If you write controls around the lowest common denominator, they'll tie the bulk of people up in red tape. So we need to have our controls in hold people, be willing to, what we would talk about is you would swap control for accountability, but you have to then grasp the accountability piece, which I don't really have time to talk about today, but I'm happy to pick up in questions. Obviously the right standards and an enabling safety management system. But why I sort of lay this slide out is I think a lot of people, or a lot of senior people perhaps think it's all about, you put the safety management system in and then that does the job. Well, you can see it's a key means issue, but it's only one of a large number of means issues. And it's leadership's job to ensure that people have these means if you want them to do the job right. Then we have ability, which is people can do their job. And that's primarily know how and know why. And I think this really ties in to what we were talking about earlier on. People have to understand what the hazards are and why they have to do their job a certain way and why their actions are important. I think we were talking about the ability to, on our table, we were talking about the ability to sort of filter out bow ties so that we can see the human parts. When we understand what we're asking people to do in detail, then then we can connect them to that, and actually that know why can turn really, it's, no one will claim it's exciting entering completed work orders onto a CMMS system, but they are a key part of operating safely. And when you can connect people to what the function of their, it becomes this sort of potentially tedious task becomes, I know that I am a key part of managing safety. Once people have the means and the ability, they should be held accountable. But what we believe people should be held accountable for is not results, but contribution. So we should be helping people to understand what the contribution is and appreciating what excellence in that contribution looks like. And it's our job as leaders to enable excellence in people. And, this is not going to be a surprise to any of the people here, but, I come back to these 3 questions that were posed after Buncefield over and over again. And I think, in terms of this, I think they understanding what can go wrong and what's preventing them, i.e. barrier-based management, helps people unlock their contribution. And every level should understand their contribution. So if you're a senior leader, it isn't just my contribution is standing up and saying how important safety is. It's not even just being a role model. If I'm a senior leader, I need to understand, and we were talking about this at lunchtime, Paul, where my decisions, the decisions I make, where do they fit into the safety piece? That's part of my contribution. I need to understand that, and we need to challenge. And if senior leaders can't answer these questions, I think this is where we need to start. You shouldn't get to be a senior leader in a high hazard business and not be able to answer these questions. And we've got to be brave and challenge upwards, I think. And just that point of intent, when I go out to assure myself, am I going to find out what issues there are, what means and ability issues, potentially accountability issues, or am I looking to tick a box to tell myself it's all fine and I can go sleep like a baby in my bed at night? And that speaks to my intent. Couple more thoughts. I think we need to look in the mirror. When there is a problem raised, where does my mind go? Am I examining myself, what I should have done, what people up the line should have done, or am I pointing a finger? That's your intent. So we have a approach where we suggest, as well as all the technical investigation that you would do, if you have a non-conformance or an exception, I guess you could call it, because good, you should look at the good as well as the bad. But when you have an exception, you should be asking yourself, what were the means, ability, accountability issues all the way up the line, and treating those appropriately. If safety is a value, then what are the non-negotiables? And we should be thinking about every decision that we make and saying, is there a safety impact? If safety really is a value to me, what does that imply I should do in that situation? And when you do that over and over again, that's where you build the trust. People will believe you when you stand up and say safety's the key thing here. And then I think we have to get into this mindset of happy discontent. The people I spoke to when I interviewed them, there was this real, it's an uneasy tension, but you've got to be happy to live in that space of, I have to acknowledge where I've come from and give credit where credit's due, but I have to keep my foot on the gas. And I have to accept that excellence in this means never ever being done. There's no getting to the end of the list. It's a journey of continuous improvement. I always talk about continuous improvement as walking up a hill, stopping and admiring the view, but the hill has no top, and I have to accept the next thing to do is turn around and continue walking up the hill. And that's the journey, endless journey that we're on. And so then the very last image is just, so we did this piece of work looking at safety leadership excellence, and we came up with, I think, 21 sort of descriptors of excellence in, and we don't mean people who work in safety, it's any leader and actually leaders in the line, in order to manage safely well. This is what excellence looks like. And I have some glossies of this visual if people would like it. The paper that went with this and the paper that went with the interviews. If you are interested in them, just give me a shout and I'll give you a copy. That's all I've got. Thank you very much. 4 minutes to go.
You triggered a memory from when I was 21. So I was on my sandwich placement, first experience being in the industry, working on a pilot plan, learned a lot on that pilot plan. But we were introducing a new method of doing something. And I got in trouble. I got dragged up to the director of research and was told, you're being too honest and truthful, you need to stop telling them all this stuff. And I decided I wasn't going to be that type of leader. And then somebody said triggered that memory from a very long time ago. And it was about they didn't want the operators to know how hazardous the stuff we were introducing was. Yeah, me as the idiot, 21, not knowing any different, thought they needed that knowledge. I think it's true that they needed that knowledge. So, thank you for that. Any questions?
When I was a train operating company, we did something called safety tours. And I wondered whether, reflecting on what you've said and what a good safety tour looks like, may be quite similar.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I think it should start, because look, we used to get senior leaders and they rock up in their stay pressed super white paper dust suits looking like, you know, kind of a baby fawn that's just been born and doesn't know where to walk. You know, well, for a start, you shouldn't look like that. You know, you ought to feel comfortable in that space. But then they don't know what to go and look at. And I think, again, if you are doing barrier-based management, you would know what are my big hazards? That's what I'm going to go and look at. And if, you know, auditing a scaffold, I'm saying, where's the scaff tags? Are the toe boards correct? If I'm watching the game on scaffold, I'm saying to my construction supervisor, how do you request a scaffold? Show me the paperwork. Do you understand what that means? Has anyone showed you how to fill out that piece of paperwork? You know, do you get the scaffold? How often do you not get the scaffold that you want? When you want the scaffold being altered, what do? You know, it's a completely different conversation.
Yeah, good safety tool for all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Alistair does right, got to check this. Do you do safety? Tick the box. It's a very different conversation. I think in E.ON, we taught 42 leaders about how to ask questions about process safety, where most of them were accountants. And they had no idea how to ask the question. And they said, well, we won't understand the answer. No, but you know when somebody is lying to you. If they give you an answer and they feel comfortable with that answer, that's great. If they're giving you an answer you don't feel comfortable about, this is where we come in. You come and talk to us. Because you've got those perceptions as a leader. Just asking the question drives the change.
Yeah, I think being driven by curiosity as opposed to thinking you have the answers. You know, genuinely interested in what you find as opposed to it's a segue and you demonstrating what you know, I think is a completely different conversation.
I have a question. Have you encountered anything related to safety process which is of which you are less in control? I'm asking it, we are often the ultimate client in projects. Meaning that we have contractors and subcontractors with their own methods of working, and to a certain extent, yes, you have influence and leverage. But there is also a point in time where you want to give a good example, but also the uncomfortable feeling that you are infringing on someone else's culture. And that's really difficult how to lead in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure I have a coherent answer. No, I think trust, but again, I think it's all about trust, you know, and how do we build these relationships? Because, you know, these relationships of trust should be just as appropriate between, you know, suppliers and as they are between, as employees. But, I mean, maybe I'm talking about nirvana here, but again, the kind of contracts that we set up with people, that actually kind of tells us a little bit about, like, are we trying to set up a contract that is going to promote trust or put a wedge through trust? That would be something that, kind of, it's just a thought.
Fiona?
Do you think that our companies allow us to promote that curiosity that you're talking about, or do we prefer that leaders get good news all the time?
Oh, I think that certainly the, kind of the message that came through from my interviewees would be more of, yeah, we want the good news. And if it's bad news, you need to fix the bad news as quick as possible so that I don't have to know that there's bad news.
I mean, Lord Brown of BP, 2 months before Texas City in 1995, went on video interview and said BP had safety sorted. 2 months later, they killed 15 people. And what he was being told was slips, trips and falls were sorted. He was given no information about the big major accident hazards that were going on.
No, I mean,
because he didn't want to know.
That safety sorted is someone who is really not happy with that happy discontent piece. It's like kind of, I want to know it's all done. It's never done. It's never done.
Right, thank you. Oh, one more question.
Yeah. Through your interviews and the information you gathered, did you make any sort of correlation between personality and taught skills, for example? Do you think a certain personality makes a better leader, or do you think all leaders can be taught to be good leaders?
I think, sort of within, let's take the process safety community. I think within the process safety community, there will be some people who are really good direct contributors, really good technically, don't want to be and are not ideally suited to being leaders. And we should find, ICI had the scientific ladder, and I fully support that kind of thing where people we shouldn't make it such that you have to become a line manager in order to rise in an organisation. That's actually not serving anyone. But I think there's a lot more that can be done, and this is the work that we do. I've done a lot of work with engineering leaders who are player managers. And one of the problems is they like the playing piece and they don't like the managing quite as much. But there's lots of leadership practice that you can learn and it will make you a good leader. It's, I think I think we like to believe that these, a bit like kind of sporting naturals, that these people like just spring from the womb and are better at it. They put a lot of practice in. I think some people instinctively are good leaders, but lots of other people for whom it's less instinctive could be good leaders given the right practice and time. Is that
Yeah.
Would you agree or disagree?
I've heard my experiences, I find people, particularly who may have a heavier safety bias, are people who have evolved through a business rather than someone who we have cherry picked for deliverables in other areas.
Yeah.
Is my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's dark and lonely work, isn't it? I think you've got to have some skin in the game, otherwise it would be pretty miserable, wouldn't it?
I never used to be grey until I started doing process safety. Somebody told me once, just take up whistling. Whistling makes you feel happier.
Right, I'm going to
Yes.
unhook.